Thanks for joining for another episode of the TechSpective Podcast. I have with me my friend Jeetu Patel. So Jeetu, if you could give a little bit of introduction and background on yourself.
Tony, it's good to see you, and thanks for having me on the show. I'm Jeetu. I actually work at Cisco, and I've been here for about 5 years. I'm the chief product officer, so I run the product organization at Cisco, and we're having the time of our lives right now. So let's keep it going, knock on wood, but it's a lot of fun.
Okay, so you and I, we talk on a fairly regular basis. I mean, of all of the companies that I talk to and the executives that I talk to, I'd say you're easily top 2 or 3 of people that I talk to on a regular cadence.
I'm honored, but we have enough news to keep coming back to you with.
Well, I was going to say, as am I, because I appreciate that you respect my opinion and insight enough to say, hey, well, let's go see what Tony thinks.
I like people who ask me questions that in the second and third level of detail, because that actually makes it more fun, because the magic is not just in the superficial stuff, but it's when you actually go into the how these things work. I'm really proud of what the team's built.
Well, okay,
and you do a very good job of that.
Well, thank you. The conversations you and I've had, and frankly, the conversations I've had with everybody for the last year and a half, revolve around agentic AI. Everything's agentic AI. So let's kind of start. Let's start with just how do you define agentic AI and the value you see in it, because it's I feel like it's a very tenuous thing. Like depending on your level of technical expertise of what it is and stuff, like the hype around it makes it sound way more magical than it really is and stuff. And so I'm trying to basically break apart the marketing hype of agentic AI from, okay, well, what can it actually do for me?
Yeah, it's a great question. If I were to think about this, I think of agentic as a second major phase of AI in this move that we've had with transformers, and so the first phase was chatbots that intelligently answered questions for us, and it felt like magic for the first few months, and then all of a sudden we've all gotten used to it, and I don't know how I'd get through my day without it, and I don't really think about how amazing it is. You just use it, and that's actually the amazing ability for humans to just normalize on whatever the step function improvement becomes the norm very, very quickly. Second phase is these agents that are going to intelligently conduct tasks and jobs for us almost fully autonomously on behalf of humans. And these agents, I think, are going to be, fundamentally transformative to society in the sense that, one, you will have many, many of these agents. So for every human, let's say you have 10 to 100 agents, and they're going to work 7x24. So every agent's going to be, on average, have 3 times as much throughput if they were just as much as a human. And so when you start looking at that, the compounding effect is pretty profound. But why is it important? Is that there's a bunch of tasks that either humans don't have time to do, or humans might not be the best at doing, or we can't even think about solving that problem, that agents will be able to do. Now, there's the other side of the equation, which is there's a bunch of things that humans do that I don't think machines are going to be that good at doing. And we should continue to make sure that we spend time doing those. And so, for example, I feel like humans are very good at making decisions with a level of gut instinct and intuition with incomplete data. We're very good at that. I don't think AI is going to be very good at that, but what AI is going to be very good at is large volumes of data that can be taken and distilled down so that you can actually have some pattern recognition that happens. AI tends to be pretty good at that. So what we will start to see is there's a huge shift towards augmentation of agents within the workforce so that every business process, every workflow within a company is eventually going to get reimagined. There is a lot of fear around, hey, what happens with jobs? And are we all going to lose our jobs and sit by the ocean and just stare at the sky? And I feel like that's a little premature because what I think will happen is some jobs will be lost, virtually every job will get reconfigured, and there'll be entirely net new industries that get created. So the jobs that are going to be the most prominent jobs in 2040, I don't even think have been created yet. And so we have to make sure that those happen.
Yeah. Well, so I've gone through different iterations of this thought process myself. There is the standard, kind of like you just alluded to. There's the standard sort of, jobs are going to be lost, and you think back to, the analogy everyone uses is like, the automobile, and it's like, all right, well, all of a sudden, the guys who made wagon wheels and the guys who put horseshoes on horses, we didn't need them so much anymore. They lost their jobs. But to your point, it's like, okay, but new jobs exist after that. All of a sudden, well, now you need people who understand combustion engines, and now you need, things change. In a similar vein, I've had conversations on this podcast about, what AI does, what technology does. Let's not just going to blanket AI, but what technology does in terms of our cognitive abilities. And like there was, I forget who it was. There was a study like late last year about how people in general are not as good with maps as they were 30, 40 years ago, because they don't have to be. I've got a GPS. And I've talked about the example of like phone numbers, like that when when I was in high school, I delivered pizza,
I memorized every number. Yeah.
And I memorized, I had all the phone numbers memorized, so I knew like 50 phone numbers off the top of my head. I also had the entire map of my city memorized because there was no GPS. Yeah. So when they handed me a pizza with an address on it, I just knew where to go. And initially, when I pondered that, I thought, that seems like a problem. What are we going to do about that? And the more my thought process has evolved on it some, where I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's not. It feels like a problem because I'm thinking about it in terms of legacy, in terms of what I'm used to, and based on what I'm used to, it seems like, okay, well, that's going to be a problem that I'm not going to be able to do that. But the reality is, we adapt to where it becomes second nature and it's not a thing anymore. There are other examples that people bring up all the time, like using calculators in schools, like when that first became a thing, and everyone's like, well, if we let kids use calculators in schools, nobody's going to learn math. And it's like, well, no, you just learn different math. Like you learn the math differently.
The worry is not that, in my mind. If I were to kind of dig second level, the worry is not that new jobs will be created and the current jobs will be lost. The worry is that humans won't have jobs to do because AI will do everything. And that, I think, is giving it too much credit, because I think that it's hard to overestimate human creativity and the instinctive desire that we have to want to add value and want to actually do something fulfilling. And that drives the human race. So it's not something that you're just going to have everyone say, okay, if you just had enough resources, you would all be sitting at the beach. I'd be bored to death. Well, I'd do something different, but
you're taking the conversation somewhere where it's like it becomes more philosophical and less about technology. But so here's the thing. I've pondered that as well. So I'm like, look, is AI going to take some jobs? Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
There's no way it won't. Will it also create new jobs? Sure.
Yes.
Ultimately, though, the thing that the thing you said you're worried about, I'm like, okay, yes, I'm also worried about that in the short term. Long term, if we fast forward 50 years, as far as I'm concerned, it's the goal. I'm thinking in terms of Star Trek universe. I'm thinking in terms of Starfleet Utopia, and yes, the AI should do all of the things that it can do. Absolutely, it should do it. And the problem we have as human beings today is that our planet, our global economy is built on capitalism and transactions and like I need to have an income in order to pay for my house and my food and my clothes. And if you take away my ability to have a job, then I don't have an income. And it's like, okay, so we have to work through that part, because we have to, like, if we're gonna eventually, I think we will get there. I think we will get to the point where it's like, okay, well, we literally don't need you to have a job. You don't need to work. But in order to get there, we also have to have some sort of universal basic income. There has to be some sort of something that says, here, you're going to survive regardless of whether you work or not. But to your point about human drive, when that debate comes up, and this is why I say it gets off technology and into philosophy, when the debate comes up about universal basic income, there's almost always someone on the anti-UBI side who says, well, no, everyone's going to be lazy sitting in their living room, playing Xbox. That's all that's going to happen. And it's like, okay, well, no, because most people don't want to do that. Like, I mean, certainly there are going to be some people who want to do that, and there are going to be people who maybe they want to go hike more or something. They want to go fishing. There will be people who want to do those things. But to your point, there will be people who will then be freed to do something we haven't even thought of yet. And,
I think
that drive exists. Like, most people are not going to just sit in their living rooms playing Xbox just because they can. They're going to find something to do with their life.
I think the philosophical, and Sam Altman talks about this really eloquently, the philosophical kind of need for, status and recognition and fulfillment through contribution. I don't think those things go away because a machine can do something. I think there's going to be, in my mind, like we could go for a very long time on this topic, and at some point in time, it might be worth doing a podcast just on this topic alone. But the way I see it right now is some jobs will be lost, every job will be reconfigured, and entirely new industries will be created. That's topic number one. Topic number two is there's going to be certain things that AI is very good at. And in my mind, I think that there's three categories of jobs that AI is going to do. The first category of jobs are ones where we humans don't have time to do them. The second category of jobs are jobs where AI might be better than humans at doing them. And so we're like, hey, you know what? Give it to AI to do because it's going to be better. Like, they might be better at doing repetitive tasks, number crunching, data analysis, all of those pieces. And number three is there are going to be things that AI does that humans just simply can't even imagine doing. And so those are the three categories on that end. And then on the other end, there'll be categories of jobs that we will be able to do. Like I was telling this to another reporter on a TV show kind of recently. They said, what jobs are not going to go away? I'm like, my 2.5 years ago, my mother was in the hospital for eight weeks before she passed away. And I'll tell you this, there ain't a robot that's going to take the place of a nurse, because of the empathy and the caring and the, all of that that's going to be required. Like, there are certain things that a human touch is very, very valuable for. And we are still social creatures, and we're not just a completely perfect, species of logic. We are emotional beings where logic is a very small part of the way in which our motivation system works. And so that is something that's hard to kind of, understate. It's hard to overestimate that.
Right. Okay. Well, so pulling it back to agentic AI, one of the ways I envisioned this is I had this epiphany a while back that when we talk about having it do things, like I don't know, like I'm trying to think of the tasks that I do. Like if I'm researching, doing research for an article or whatever, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I'm going to go on Google and I'm going to start typing things and figure out, the various queries that I want to ask about that topic and start digging through links until I, find the research I want. Well, now I can go to Perplexity or I can go to ChatGPT and I can just say, hey, find me this stuff. And now there's a level of trust that has to be earned from the AI in that respect, where it's like, well, when you do that, you do have to go and verify, like, okay, well, is the answer you gave me correct? Because I don't want to just take your research at face value and have it be false, which, it's gotten better over time, but like a year and a half ago or so, I did something like that. And thankfully I do double check those things, because it gave me like, well, NBC News said blah, blah, blah. And then, USA Today said blah, blah, blah. And then with links, and at face value, you would look at that and go, all right. But I clicked on the links and they were all 404. Like, it literally invented USA Today and NBC News links that did not exist. It literally would invent a quote. It would say, Jeetu Patel said blah, blah, blah. And then I would go Google it, and I'd say, well, you're going to have to find me, like, where's the exact place where Jeetu said that? And it was like, oh, you got me. Yeah, I just made that up. I'm like, you can't do that. So I'm like having debates with the AIs. And I'm like, listen, you can't invent quotes. Like,
the funny part is, there's a lot of humans that make up what I've said too. But I'll tell you this, like, you have a very good point, which is there is this trait that these models have around hallucination. And hallucination is a feature in a lot of areas. You're writing poetry, hallucination is great. You're going out and doing something very deterministic in a workflow in a financial services regulated industry. Really bad to be hallucinating at that point in time. So I do think that there's characteristics of those dimensions that tend to be in these models. But I think if you look just in the past 3 years, we have actually been able to drop that dramatically. Like, there's a precipitous drop of hallucination in models. And what you see with GPT 5.1 versus what you would have seen with GPT 3 is like night and day different on hallucination. And so these models, yes, there might be instances that you'll find, but what you'll find is that there's going to be far, far fewer instances, and there's going to be an exponentiality of drop of hallucination and of behaviors that we don't want, because eventually these models are being built for the benefit of humans. And so the companies building these models are actually working hard at solving that problem. So while I think it's definitely an issue, it's not one that I today wake up worrying about the way that I did 3 years ago. Absolutely. Because I think we've got a much closer grasp on that from a research standpoint than we did before.
Absolutely, I fully agree. I've seen it improve dramatically in a short period of time. I will say that's also a little bit dangerous, because improve dramatically is different than infallible, and so you don't want to get people where they go, okay, well, I am double checking the results from ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever. Like, I'm not trusting it. I am checking, but it's like, well, if you keep checking and it keeps being right, eventually you kind of quit paying attention, which is how it should work, honestly. I mean, and the example I've been using recently is like, an AI agent is not that different than hiring a human being. Like, if I hired a human being to do these things for me, I'm not going to just accept the first thing they give me. I'm going to double check it and be like, well, let's make sure you know how to do this job. Just like you have
human error, you're going to have AI error.
Right.
And you're going to have to account for it. I think there's going to be some of that's going to be there.
Right.
Absolutely.
So it's like, and that's I think one of the key things that I think we need to keep kind of hammering home for people is probabilistic versus deterministic, and maybe finding better terms that don't sound so technical to people, but basically just saying, look, don't expect absolute perfection from a system that's designed to only be probably correct.
That's right. And by the way, we have not had that absolute perfection in the current way of working. So the way that you should think about this is, if it gets better than where we are, that's actually good enough.
Well, like a couple of years ago, I talked with I don't know, a year and a half ago. So I was talking with Chris Wysopal, and about like vibe coding. People using generative AI to write code, and what that means from the perspective of like their platform and doing code security, stuff. And his response was, and I had to go back and find the direct quote, but the response was something along the lines of, well, no human ever wrote perfect code in the first place. That's why our platform exists. So like from the perspective of like a Veracode or whatever, it's like it doesn't really matter. Like, you
So
whether it's a
true.
human doing the coding or an AI doing the coding, you still have to run it through a checker to make sure that it's good.
1,000%. And by the way, that's that kind of the. And by the way, I think it's a good thing and it's a healthy thing for us to push for perfection. But what I think people that if you dismiss that as saying, well, that's why this is not going to be effective, that doesn't make any sense, right? Like there's always going to be times when for a certain use case, this thing might not be good enough, and you have to say, you know what, no, try harder. You're doing a brain surgery, the precision required might be very different. Don't just hand it over to a remote surgeon to do it, or a remote robot to do it, if you don't think that the model is good enough to go out and do it with a level of precision.
That reminds me, and now when I write the blog post that goes with this podcast, I'm gonna have to go try and find this reference. But somewhere back in my sales training days, decades ago, there was an anecdote someone told regarding like basically quality assurance kind of stuff, and they're like, if you're talking about Coca-Cola, quality assurance or whatever, and you get it like 95% right, maybe that's okay. If you're talking about like parachutes, like a parachute, you kind of want it to be like more 99.59.
That's right.
Kind of thing. Like you're not.
Nuclear power plants have a very different, kind of reliability factor than you do the e-commerce system for a lemonade stand. It's just
But there's an example that I use, and I don't like to give Elon credit for anything, but I do give him credit for this. Like back.
He deserves a lot of credit, man. The guy's done a lot of good stuff in the world.
Okay, well, we won't get into how it's been overshadowed by the bad things he's done, but a number of years ago, like early days of Tesla, self-driving type stuff.
Yeah.
It kept making headlines, Tesla got in an accident. And he made a comment to something to the effect of like, well, yes, but you're focusing on Tesla got in an accident and you're ignoring that 10,000 other cars got in an accident.
Yeah.
The same
exactly.
day. The reason I keep using that example is because that is an example to me of like, yes, we're expecting perfection from the technology side. We're expecting,
but I do think
if I'm using AI, what?
Yeah. I was going to say, but there's a social issue, which is people right now have been conditioned, and it might not be wrong to say it's okay when something happens that's catastrophic and tragic because of a human error, but it's not okay when that happens from a machine error. And that, like I'm not even sure. So the bar for machines is going to be meaningfully higher than the human error bar, but it's not going to be perfect. Like how you would feel if one of your family members went through something tragic in a Waymo versus when someone was driving. It's just different. Like you will have a different reaction to it, and I think it's easy to say, in theory, don't look for something perfect, but I think there's a bar for machine error which is going to be much lower than that for a human error, acceptability wise in society.
Which and the thing is, I think to an extent, I do honestly think that that's fair, as long as people are aware and accept that it won't be perfect. Like you can have a higher bar, just understand that it won't be perfect.
Yes, absolutely.
But the other thing I was going to say about agents, the other epiphany I had was I was talking with someone about, as organizations, and this kind of straddles generative and agentic AI, but as organizations have been kind of waffling on, first it was like, well, we're just going to ban everything. And then it was like, okay, well, we're going to let you use things. And then you have some companies who are like, no, we're going to require you to use things or you're fired.
We are in the required to use things, or you might not be relevant category in a lot of areas at Cisco.
Okay. Well, so I would have a debate with someone about, is it cheating or whatever for someone to, offload their work to AI? And I suddenly thought of people like you, people in the C-suite, and I said, well, you know what? People in the C-suite have teams. They've got VPs who work under them, and the VPs have directors who work under them, and they delegate things, and those people go off and do their specific tasks, and they generate productivity that all funnels back up to the C-suite so that people like you can make effective decisions about how to proceed. It's like you're not personally going out and doing everything. You have a team of people to help you do those things. Yeah. And I'm like, so agentic AI is just me doing that at my level as an individual employee saying, okay, well, what if I have a team?
You hit the nail on the head. Every human will essentially have at this point a team of agents that they're managing. So everyone becomes a manager. You don't have anything as just an individual contributor. Everyone's become a manager because you're managing a team of agents. And these team of agents, in some ways, with very high throughput, and you will have to make sure that you coordinate them, and there'll have to be some kind of mechanism for oversight that needs to get created. And those oversight mechanisms might be other agents that you create, but you will be living in a multi-agent world where that'll happen. And that's just the way that I think things will evolve. And I think what ends up happening is people have a hard time thinking exponentially on multiple dimensions, because that's just not how us humans are wired to think. We think in a very linear direction, and right now it's almost impossible on a multi-vector basis to make a prediction 5 years out, because there's too many things changing and too many variables changing where you can't make a cogent prediction 5 years out. But that doesn't mean that the exponentiality is not going to have a meaningful effect, because there's such a steep curve. Like if I look at just the compression of time it takes for a human to learn, the amount of compounding of scientific progress that happens, let's say, is 1,000x of what it is today. Those are like non-trivial advancements that will have a positive ripple effect in society.
Right. Well, and this is it's a simplistic view, because it comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning about how like I think about these things in terms of like the way I do things now, which will probably change dramatically in ways that I haven't imagined yet. But the way that I think of things now, I can look and I can say, okay, well, what do I do with my day? I might wake up. Yes. And I'm gonna, go check my email inbox and see what came in overnight. And is there something I need to be concerned about there? And I might check news headlines and see, well, what's going on there? What should I care about there? I might check my calendar and see, okay, well, what does my day look like? What meetings do I have? And those are all things that like agentic AI could just do that. Again, it's like a C-suite having an executive assistant where like you just come in and sit down at your desk. The executive assistant has already done this for you to say, hey, here's the emails you should care about. Here's the news you should care about. And here's what your schedule looks like today.
I think and I relate to this a lot because I am not particularly the most structured, organized guy. Like if you told me every single day in the morning, the first thing you should do is look at your to-do list, like I will not remember that that's the first thing I have to do every day. I flow a little bit more based on like, I'm much more on the creative side than I am on the super structured organizational side. But I understand the value of it. And so I, for example, have the luxury to hire people around me that are very good operationally, so that I don't have to make sure that I do those things. And they create systems around me that actually allow me to operate effectively. But I'm the 0.0001% of the population who has that luxury to do that. But wouldn't it be great if every creative person on the planet had that luxury? And how much more productive they could be, and how much more impact they could have, and how much more throughput they would have. And one of the things that ends up happening is right now, the general apprehension tends to be around change of the unknown, right? And what I tell people is if you don't like change, wait until you encounter irrelevance.
Good one.
It's much scarier. This is not even my line. Someone told me about this one. I don't remember who, but it's actually a very interesting thing to think about. Is we have to get used to constant change and be comfortable with it, because the absence of getting used to that will guarantee that we will become irrelevant in society and we will not be able to function at the pace that everything's moving. So you have to get comfortable with learning to adjust to the pace and accommodating that pace in your development personally. And the other thing is your development never stops. Your personal development has to continue. And those that feel like, I did that in my early years, and now I'm actually, I don't need to learn anymore. I just need to make sure that I do it this way because it worked for the past 30 years. I think that's a flawed way of thinking, because just because it worked for the past 30 years has no guarantee it's going to work for the next 10. Zero, and I think we have to make sure that we think through those things in the way that society recalibrates for functioning.
Well, and one of the things, my wife is the one who kind of first pointed this out to me, because it's an area I have issues with sometimes. But the ChatGPTs, and I'm using ChatGPT in the generic sense, like Kleenex or Coke,
Yeah, sure.
But the ChatGPTs of the world are good at executive function. They're like, because I think people, I know for myself, I do have a to-do list, and I try to write all the things down on the to-do list. What I am not as good at is okay, but what's the right order of these things? Like, I have this to-do list. And I can pull this back to the cybersecurity side of things. I mean, it's the thing we've been talking about for years from a SOC perspective of, you've got 10,000 vulnerabilities to deal with. You've got, alert fatigue. You've got all these vulnerabilities. How do you decide where to start? And that is somewhere where, like, the AI is actually very good at saying, given the right context, to understand, okay, well, this one has a deadline. This one matters more. Like, do these things in this order, because otherwise you might knock 10 things off your list, but there are 10 things that are irrelevant. And like, you feel like you accomplished something. And that goes back to the, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People type stuff.
You bring up a really good point, because I think what we have historically been conditioned to is thinking about evaluating the cost of doing something different, right? We always look at the risks, we look at the costs, we look at the upside, we say, is there an ROI? What we have not done is really assessed in some domains the cost of oversight from the current status quo. And that, I think, is an important thing to keep in mind. Like, when you think about cybersecurity and you think about a SOC, this field so well. You think about a security operations center and how the breaches are happening all over the place, and you need to make sure that you need to, kind of oversee if there's a breach in progress, and then intercept it and detect it and investigate it as fast as possible so you can do a response and remediation for it. The cost of oversight of a breach could be pandemonium, right? And so if you can have agents that can have a much broader surface area and a much lower error rate of missing a signal and not having that much oversight, if the oversight ratio goes down, it's net positive for everyone. And so it's not that a SOC analyst would not be valuable. It's that the SOC analyst might think about reconfiguring the way that they work by working with AI agents so that they actually can do high order bits that they do really well, that can exercise judgment and intuition and gut feel, and then look to AI for saying, filter this for me in a way that I don't actually have a massive disproportionality between signal to noise.
Right. Well, and there's a lot of overlapping stuff too. Like when I was giving the example of having an AI agent that can check my email and be like, hey, here's the ones you should care about. It's like, okay, well, on some level that already existed before generative AI, because Microsoft already had the well, here's your focus. It was already doing that on like just a general logic level to say, okay, you seem to keep reading emails from Jeetu and you seem to keep deleting these other emails. So we're just going to go ahead and pre-filter these for you. And put these over here in the junk mail folder. So that already exists on some level. On the SOC side, even before we started getting into like the more generative and agentic AI side of things, we had security graph analysis and the ability to like take all of the telemetry, put it together in one thing, and then look at it and go, okay, yeah, you've got these 10,000 vulnerabilities over here on the right, but if you fix this one choke point, none of these matter. Like, you don't have to fix 10,000 vulnerabilities. You can just fix these 50.
And by the way, the agentic SOC is about intelligently parsing the signals and decoupling it from the noise, right? And so in my mind, like that is the piece that we haven't fully realized the potential of, is when you have an infinite amount of capacity. We have just been conditioned for the past thousands of years in living in a world of scarcity. And I don't think we as a society have calibrated what it does feel like to live in a world of complete abundance and what could happen. Now, by the way, as you get to pursue a world of complete abundance with AI, the thing that's scarce, in fact, is the infrastructure. The thing that's scarce is the trust deficit that's there today, where there's a high level of trust deficit. So that's an impediment. The thing that's scarce is that there's a pretty huge data gap on how people can actually utilize their data effectively so that they can get the most out of AI. So like, we have to keep in mind that our biggest problem right now in AI is power. You don't have enough power. You don't have enough compute. You don't have enough network bandwidth to be able to go out and satiate the needs of AI. Like, that is literally the biggest problem. Like, I was, I don't know when your podcast comes out, but I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday with, His Royal Highness from Saudi Arabia, MBS, and President Trump, and everyone was there. And like the level of activity that's going on around the world of building out infrastructure so that they can actually tokenize with the lowest amount of kilowatt, power usage, as well as the most efficient from a cost perspective, is going to be directly proportional. Like, token generation is going to be directly proportionate to a country's economic prosperity as well as to national security. And that, the scarcity is there, but the scarcity, if you solve that scarcity, the scarcity will not be in intelligence. And so we will actually have an abundance of intelligence. And if we can actually produce intelligence at the lowest kilowatt power consumption and the lowest amount of cost, now all of a sudden you start seeing a very different kind of world where the kind of problems we can solve, we have not even probably entertained solving because we didn't think it was possible. The way that we'll solve cancer, the way that we'll solve disease, the way that we'll solve poverty, the way that we'll solve multitude of different kind of areas, I think will be very different if AI is used in the right ways. And I feel like right now we haven't fully digested the possibility. And by the way, it's normal not to, because everyone's thinking, hey, is this a bubble? Right? And there is going to be parts of this market that are going to be categorically frothy. Every single market, when you have something that is this exponential, you're going to have a lot of froth, and you have to kind of distill the froth. But if you don't have enough froth, then the market potential is not high enough, is the way I think about it. Like, if you don't have some bad ideas starting to come in that get funded that actually fail, then you know that the market was not big enough. But outside of that froth, there's going to be meaningful value and to society that gets contributed as a result of this, where this movement and this platform shift will be bigger than any that we've seen. It'll be bigger than the Industrial Revolution. It'll be bigger than the printing press. It'll be bigger than the internet. It'll be bigger than mobile. And the reason for that is because you are actually literally augmenting capacity to humans in a very, very different way and at a very different scale proportion than what we've done in the past. And that, I feel, is not fully digested yet by everyone. And as a result, we continue to have this debate, which in my mind tends to be a very tactical one. And yes, when someone says to me, is there a bubble? Yes, in some companies, they're overvalued. It makes no sense. If you have a thin wrapper on a model, you will not be a durable business. Like that is not a sustained business model. If that company got valued for billions of dollars, that is froth. That is a bubble. That will burst. But that doesn't mean that everything is going to be a bubble.
Well, and someone pointed out to me recently, and I was like, wow, that's actually true. And I was like, I hadn't really thought of it. They said, when we had things like the .com bubble, it's not the .com didn't go away. The internet didn't disappear because the bubble popped. It's like when we talk about the bubble only matters to Wall Street, really. I mean, and yes, I mean, jobs will be impacted by like economies will be impacted by this bubble, but like that doesn't mean AI itself is going to pop. Like AI will still be here.
Correct. And yes, we have to make sure that we can separate the wheat from the chaff. And I think that is a pretty important skill that'll be there. Like if momentum investors that think that anything that they touch is going to turn to gold are going to be playing with fire. But the people that actually have, on the other hand, like you look at someone like OpenAI, it's a really bad idea to bet against them, in my mind, because I feel like they're going to do a great job. It's a really bad idea given what Anthropic has done to bet against them. But that doesn't mean there won't be hundreds of companies that currently AI wash themselves, or might have a thesis on AI that's actually not even AI washing, but is a thesis that is where the strategic control point is going to be, which is going to be in the thin shim above the model. I feel like those companies might have a very, very hard time on durability, and I think like that's an area where more education needs to be seeped into the market.
Well, I mean, I'll pull in what little bit I know. I'm not an analyst, but what little bit I know from the cybersecurity side of like, we have that all the time in cybersecurity.
All the time.
But it's
all the time.
You have startups and they do something cool, but it's not really cool enough to be its own product.
Company.
We're not going to make a whole category. It's a feature, and then they get acquired. And so so I think we'll see a ramp up in like mergers and acquisitions in the AI side of like, okay, well, yes, what you're doing is cool, but it should just be a feature of ChatGPT. It's not its own company.
That actually is a very good framework that gets used a lot of times. Is it a feature? Is it a product? Or is it a company? Or is it a movement? Right? And you have to make sure that you're graduating from one to the other. There are a lot of things which get hyperbolized as a movement that are nothing but a feature. And there are a lot of things that people think about as a feature that might actually be a movement.
Yeah. So we're almost at time, so I don't want to start a whole new thing, but I had this thought I wanted to address, which is
you need to start doing like real long form podcasts, like what Lex and
like do a Joe Rogan, like where we just talk.
And Dwarkesh and Joe Rogan and all those guys do.
This occurs to me primarily with the AI SOC, but I'm sure it has application elsewhere, and that is okay. So traditional model. You hire a level 1 SOC analyst. They're entry level. They barely know anything. And your job is to sift through logs and then find stuff that's interesting for the level 2 people to look more closely at. Okay, so we offload all of that. And we say, okay, the AI can do that now. Well, the benefits here are the AI, first of all, doesn't have like the learning curve. Like it is an expert at level 1. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to graduate to level 2. You're not going to constantly lose this sort of like intellectual capital you've invested in. Like
when someone leaves,
it is going to be an expert. It is going to be an expert in level 1 SOC analysis forever, and it's just going to do that. Now it creates a little bit of a vacuum in that. Well, now that means that level 2 is the new level 1. Someone's going to be coming in as an entry level into level 2, and they're going to need to know some things which traditionally they would have learned on the job being a level 1 analyst, and now they're going to have to learn on the job as a level 2 analyst. But my point is just some of the things that we're going to offload to agentic AI, the value there is it's an expert from day one, and it's an expert that is not going to graduate and leave and make you start over with a new expert.
Yeah, it's so I agree with you on the expertise that compounds on itself, and so that'll that's definitely a benefit. I also feel like the learning curve on some of these things gets to be much faster, so that'll be another benefit of it. On the other hand, you will still need judgment and instinct to apply to it. And that's the thing that humans are good at, is the ability to apply emotion, logic, gut feel, instinct when data does not support your thesis. And there are so many things where, in fact, I'll give you this idea. That by definition, a startup is an irrational idea. By definition, right? Because that means that you're going to go out and do something that's completely counterintuitive, that no one else has thought about before. And if it was that good an idea, some people are like, well, someone would have already thought about it. No, by definition, startup's an irrational idea. But the reality is it's those irrational ideas that have actually made tech what it is because they challenge the status quo and they say, let's reframe the problem space. Let's reframe the solution space. And so I do feel like that kind of reframing is where today, the way that people think about AI is it's going to be good for compounding productivity. I actually feel like the biggest benefit of AI is going to come where it is underhyped right now, which is hard to imagine that AI is underhyped in some area, but it's underhyped in this area, is the original insights generated from AI that don't exist in the human corpus of knowledge, where we're not just aggregating data from what someone else has said in the past. It is an original insight that didn't exist, that is then going to allow us to solve problems that we never thought were possible to solve before. When that starts happening at scale, my goodness, like you start to see some really cool things happen. And that is now starting to happen in models in science and in tech. Kevin Weil is on our board. He's a good friend of mine, and whenever you sit down and talk to him, he's so excited about the research stuff that he's doing right now at OpenAI, and he will tell you, wow. Well, one of the questions was, is original insight actually starting to get generated? And the answer is absolutely categorically yes. But right now, it's not generated to the scale that we needed to for it being noticed. But the moment that starts happening, and that'll also have an exponential curve, when that starts happening, imagine how you'll be able to solve things that you never thought were possible before. It's like, wow, that is a very, very different way to kind of,
Well, and there's a philosophical there is a philosophical line there about like, well, what is an original thought? And my wife and I have had this debate with my kids about, we're because some of them are a little anti-AI, and she's like, okay, well, but everything humans do is also derivative. We're all building on the intellectual property of like what already exists. But no, it's that while it might not be an original thought, using AI like to do research or whatever, it does, like in that same way, like when you're shopping on Amazon and it says, oh, well, you know what, other people who bought this have thought about buying these things. Or if you're watching Netflix and it says, well, you know what, here's some other shows that might be, in that wheelhouse. Those types of insights aren't technically original. I mean, it's just connecting dots of data.
Yes.
But they are connecting dots in a way that you wouldn't have thought of on your own, which in essence makes it an original thought.
My point is the aggregation versus a derivative compounding, right? When you think about just aggregating, it's interesting, but when you think about derivative compounding and say, okay, right, I'm going to be able to stitch these three things together in a way and come up with something that no one else had thought about before. That's magical. And by the way that a 20-year-old thinks about this today is very different from the way that a 29-year-old thinks about this, because when you start someone who's AI native or has been using AI as they've actually started getting acclimated to society in adulthood, the way they use AI is more as a brainstorming partner. The way that, I used to use AI when I first started was a productivity tool in a very transactional way. It was kind of a search on steroids. And I do feel like that is the big shift that is occurring right now, is when we start using this as a brainstorming partner, we will come up with ideation that didn't exist, because it's just going to give us more and more thought to think through.
Well, as we wrap, okay, so I want to leave on two thoughts. Number one is we think of it as a productivity enhancer, but when I kind of distill everything we just talked about, what we end up with is it being a creativity enhancer, because I'm offloading the mundane routine tasks. I'm offloading the productivity. I'm saying, here, you go do the productivity so I can do something else.
That's right. That's the thinking. And by the way, in the thing that you're doing, that's something else, it'll also help you in that. So you're not alone.
So that's one piece. And then the other piece is just one of the things I'm continuing to realize, but also struggling with, okay, but how do I break past that, is that I'm conscious of the fact that my perceptions of both the challenges and potential solutions are rooted in what I grew up with or what I'm used to. And so like we've alluded to a few times here, like what it looks like in 6 months, what it looks like in 3 years, I can't actually even fathom. And therefore I can't really address the challenges and the solutions, because it's not gonna look the way I think it's gonna look.
One of the most important skills we will have to do, most important skills, I think, are learning to learn and learning to unlearn. We will have to figure out a way to unlearn things that we have actually gotten hardwired in our brains, so that we can actually allow for new things to take effect in a different way.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, it'd be interesting. I can have you back on in another 6 months, and we could see how dramatically things have changed.
Tony, it's such a pleasure, man, and thank you for all the good work you're doing. And it's always awesome to talk to you.
All right. Thank you.